Forget everything you know about interest rates, because rates in Russia are expected to hit 23% this month. The Russian central bank is desperately trying to tamp down inflation. But the more we looked into this story, we realized it isn't just about inflation. It's about a superheated war economy at risk of going supernova in the worst way possible. Interest rates in Russia are high right now because inflation is high. Almost 9% last month. It's been in that range for about a year now, but food staples have become especially expensive. Bread up 12% over the last year. Apples up 14%. Milk up 15%. Cabbage up 26%. Butter up 30%. Onions up 33%. And potatoes up 74%.
В целом видно, что цены выросли. Но выбирать не приходится. Если ты хочешь кушать, ты просто покупаешь.
Grocery stores have even seen a spike in thefts. Go ahead and Google Russia butter thefts. Some stores have even started keeping their stock behind lock and key. So Russia's central bank has done what central banks have done around the world to rein in inflation.
Raised interest rates to 13%.
From 15 to 16%.
To 20%.
To 21%.
But there is a steep price for making the cost of borrowing that high. For some Russians, it's going to make the prospect of home ownership impossible. But according to Russian media, corporate bankruptcies in Russia have also jumped by 20% this year, and interest rates are squarely to blame.
There are some construction firms, for instance, in Russia that have relied on borrowing from the bank. If you have a floating interest rate and the rate goes up, then suddenly your loan repayments soar.
The Russian Union of Shopping Centers has said more than 200 malls face bankruptcy because of the high cost of financing. And even those companies who are staying afloat have to make some tough choices. Take Russian railways, for example. State-owned, the single biggest rail operator in the country, both passenger and freight. But according to a leading business daily in Russia, its loans have become too expensive. And despite figuring it needs to spend around 1.3 trillion rubles, or about 17 billion Canadian, just to maintain investment levels, it's planning to scale that back by more than a third. That likely means sacrificing expansion plans to instead pay ballooning interest payments that have reportedly gone up about $4 billion US since rates started shooting up. But here's the bigger problem. This traditional lever of cooling inflation by hiking interest rates isn't working, because what's ultimately driving inflation in Russia is Putin's war machine. It's
totally agree with what he's saying right there. It's not surprising at all that Russia is having trouble with its economy, with inflation rates, with affordable housing and groceries. It's because it's focused on war right now. It's building its military machine, it's building weapon system, it's building munition, and it doesn't really care about if its people can afford an apartment to live in or a house or not, or even groceries. He doesn't care about that at all. That's not the top priority of their government right now, unfortunately.
Supercharging an economy by going to war can make it vulnerable because it has all the appearances of an economic boom, right? Everyone's working. Incredible amounts of money are being spent. But it's not driven by the market. It's driven by government spending. And it's not sustainable.
The demanding economy is skewed in favor of unproductive expenditures, which are expenditures on military and defense.
This, experts say, is the case in Russia, where the government has made the war in Ukraine the single biggest priority. Military spending now consumes about 1/3 of the country's overall budget. Just for context, almost no other country spends that much of their money on defense. Ukraine is the only exception. And this puts incredible pressure on the country's labor force. And I'll explain what I mean. When Russia's defense minister in April toured a tank production facility, he bragged about how they weren't just meeting, but rather exceeding production targets. The plant had just hired an additional 1,200 people, working around the clock to pump out tanks, armored vehicles, and flamethrowers. And to maintain that kind of production schedule, you need people. Lots of people. Look at Russia's unemployment rate, down near 2%. That's driven by two things.
Defense industries, where according to Russian official statistics, over 500,000 jobs have been added, and the armed forces, where several 100,000 jobs have additionally been created.
And that
Yeah, that's not surprising at all. Russia and Ukraine are at war, and Russia is fighting for its basically survival right now. The government, Putin, is fighting for its survival right now. So that's not surprising that it spends all of its money on the army and on defense systems and on producing tanks and weapons and munition. And as he said, it's not sustainable at all. So obviously, and hopefully it will stop soon.
That creates a gaping hole in the workforce across every other sector.
There is no industry left in Russia which not feeling labor shortage.
2.4% unemployment essentially means that Russia is above full employment and businesses are having a lot of trouble attracting or retaining labor.
And consider what happens when labor is in high demand. Wages go up more than 9% in 2024, and that's on top of 8% growth in 2023. But even if the average wage has gone up, even outpacing inflation, it's important to understand that money is not being spread out evenly. If you make tanks and rockets, it's great news.
Defense industrial wages have gone up by a factor of 5 since the beginning of the war.
Military salaries have also gone up. Soldiers are paid signing bonuses, thousands of dollars each, for going to war.
Russian soldiers have, from a financial point of view, never had it so good.
And even in death, the families of Russian soldiers are paid for their losses. Two researchers estimated what's been promised to the families of those killed or injured adds up to 6% of Russia's entire budget. But let's say you sell cars, or you're a teacher, or you make furniture for a living.
You're either losing your labor force or you're cranking up wages to remain competitive. That creates substantial cash flow issues. And at the same time period, you're facing a liquidity crisis because interest rates of 21% means that is prohibitive to borrow by virtually anybody who is not in the defense sector.
Well, I think it's obvious that nobody is happy with the war that's going on right now. Nobody wanted this war to last that long, and they all want to put an end to it. But we have to come to an agreement. We will see what happens over the next few weeks. Is Trump is actually able to bring Putin and Zelensky at the negotiation table and find a deal that is satisfying for both parties. We will see.
Of course, there are losers in this race, and this is public sector and pensioners, because state cannot compete with the corporate sector on wages.
For some parts of the population, especially the poorer segments, those who will always be worst affected by inflation, they are seeing their cost of living rise to a very uncomfortable level.
What this all adds up to is an unimaginable amount of money being pumped into the economy, but distributed very unevenly.
Зарплата у меня не растет, что вот. У меня, собственно, и особенно и беречь нечего. Сколько зарабатываю, столько трачу.
People started to notice that because of the war, which requires more and more resources, human and financial, parts of Russian life become underfinanced. I mean, utilities, infrastructure, and so on and so forth.
Add to that sanctions from the West, which have isolated and restricted Russia's economy, sending the value of the Russian ruble to new lows, which in turn, if you're a Russian, spending rubles has made everything imported more expensive, which further drives up prices. And now you see the challenge Russia's economy faces today. An economy turbocharged, but immensely off balance, inching closer to a breaking point that the country can't simply grow its way out of.
The Russian economy is running extremely hot. Vladimir Putin mentioned in October that Russia needs another million workers. Now, where will it find those? Who knows?
The funny thing about inflation is that it's only really a problem when you can't keep up with it. And in Russia right now, there is a shrinking number of available people who can keep Putin's war machine running. Depending on whose estimates you believe, Russia has lost several 100,000, maybe 750,000 soldiers, either killed, injured, or captured.
Russia started sending thousands of inexperienced troops towards soldiers.
Yeah, it's no secret to anybody that Russia and Ukraine are losing people. There are people dying and being critically armed on both sides of the border, unfortunately, on Russia's end and on Ukraine's end. And it's not good for any of those countries, so hopefully they will be able to find an agreement soon.
Themselves call the meat grinder.
All of those people need to be replaced, but Russia's labor force is already at capacity, and we're already seeing signs the economy is starting to buckle. The price of oil, the lifeblood of the Russian economy, has fallen sharply in the last several months and is expected to fall further still in 2025. GDP growth has been forecasted to slow from a very healthy high of 4% this past year to less than half that next year. And having slow growth, a sign of a weakening economy, but high inflation, a sign of an overheated economy. That's the worst of both worlds, where you have unsustainably high prices that eventually fewer and fewer people can afford.
If the war continues, every month that it continues in the current way, we get closer to a potential tipping point of essentially hyperinflation and a collapse of the wartime economy.
Now, it's important to point out, nobody is suggesting Russia's economy will implode tomorrow. It has deep pockets and can continue pumping money into the economy while taxing its people more and more, as it has done. But it can't do that forever. And once Russia dials back the war machine, it may find its civilian economy has become a deeply damaged economy.
Yeah. Totally makes sense to me. It's totally understandable that this war has to stop and stop very soon for the benefit of everybody, not only in Russia, not only in Ukraine, but around the world as well. It's very damaging to its people, it's damaging to the businesses, it's damaging to the economy. And if we are to recover and prosper and find peace again, we have to stop. We have to stop fighting and find common ground. Hopefully, we will be able to do that under the Trump presidency in the United States. We will see what happens over the next few weeks and cover it all right there on this channel. So thank you for watching. I hope you find this video interesting. Click right there to watch the next video, and I will see you there. Bye bye for now.